open your Bibles. But tonight's going to be a little bit different. Because I don't know where I'm going to go when I do get to Scripture. But tonight is an update. My take on what's been happening the last about 2 to 3 weeks, starting with 9/11 and what happened in Libya, Cairo, and other Islamic countries around the world, up until yesterday, the closing of the UN Security Council meetings that transpired all week long this last week. I call it the gathering of the insane. And some of you surely are probably thinking by now that I'm going to react to our president, President Obama of the United States of America's comments. He had some good comments, and he had a lot of foolish and stupid comments. But this is not about bashing Obama. This goes way beyond any of that. I'll let the news media that have that tendency to bash Obama take care of all that nonsense. I look at the bigger picture of things. I look at the unseen, where the real war is taking place, and then correlate that with the seen, with Satan's agents. You see me use that method throughout the Teaching the Last Day series, using history, for instance, both secular and biblical, to make the point and to prove the point I was trying to make. But the question has to be asked. Why again on 9/11? Of course, many of the news heads in the media and in print decided that it was just a coincidence at first that it happened to fall on 9/11. And of course, they blame it on a movie, a silly, stupid, low-budget movie. And by the way, do you really believe that was a Coptic Christian that produced it and directed whatever he did? A Coptic Christian, even call it Christian. This guy's background, and not only his background, because people can change, but people don't change for usually the worst. I mean, to a worse condition in their life than they were previously. Usually they change for the better, even in the Christian walk. Because most Christians are brought up to believe that they can produce some righteousness on their own, and God's going to get turned on by their do-good deeds. If this is a Coptic Christian, even the producing of his film, he deceived people what the film was going to be about, such as the actors who are now complaining that they had no idea, which I find it hard to believe. You must be one of those really dumb actors to not at least get a grip on what their script is. When you take a part, to be in anything, whether a play, a movie, whatever. But I don't buy this as a Coptic Christian with an agenda to attack Islam. I'm not going to get into other reasons tonight because it takes me away what I'm going to try to accomplish tonight, but I got a very strong hunch, based on some other things I'm not going to get into tonight, that this is no Coptic Christian, folks. This is a setup. We're just led to believe that he was a Coptic Christian with an agenda to humiliate Islam and Muhammad for whatever reasons. And of course, the film was shown once in some small theater with about 14 people showing up, and of course it didn't have that many hits, especially when something goes really viral. So how did the word get out? And it's not like it came out on 9/11. It's not like it came out on 9/10. It's not like it came out on 9/9 or 9/1. It came out already months before. So why all of a sudden the upheaval? The pieces just don't fit. That's why it's not about a film. The film was just the excuse. But there were two reasons. Well, there's more than two reasons, but I'm just going to focus on two reasons. I believe the most important two reasons that I at least have seen, or two objectives behind the attack in Libya and protests in Egypt and other Islamic countries around the world. Two reasons. And I believe when I'm done tonight, if I'm able to finish tonight, anyone that interprets these recent events that we saw on television or heard on radio, or maybe you read it somewhere, or maybe we even experienced it being in one of these countries, and if you interpret it any differently, then what I'm going to present to you tonight, I think will demonstrate, unfortunately, what you know about history, especially the history concerning Islam. Well, those are pretty bold statements. I'll back it up. That's the difference between the talking heads and what I do. You know, if you go back a few messages, I preached on watching and praying as Jesus instructed. You have to ask yourself, how can we watch and pray in these last days per Jesus' instruction? By listening to these talking heads or even preachers. For the most part, that don't even have a clue what time we are in, folks. They don't have a clue. But yet we sit with bated breath to hear every word they have to say. Or we read everything that we can. And I'm not against that. How else are you going to know what's happening? But you got to keep Scripture. You got to keep biblical history. You got to keep biblical prophecy always at the forefront to try to interpret what's going on, especially things that concern these last days in the news, to get your bearings. If you try to do without that, it's the blind leading the blind, and they're all going to fall in the ditch together. The biggest mistake that most Christians or non-Christians make is listening and being influenced by these talking heads in the government, these talking heads in the media, and even these talking heads behind the pulpits. Like I said, most of them don't have a clue. And if they do come up with a version, in the Christian world, mostly it's based on Christian science fiction interpretation, and the media is a godless interpretation of what's really happening in the world and how we can have a kumbaya moment to get everything back in order and everybody get along. And like I started a few moments ago, stating that there's two reasons that I've looked at, two objectives behind all these attacks and protests. Go to the board. I wrote those two during the song. One, revenge. And not revenge because of a film. if you believe what you saw and what you heard or read to our ambassador and 3 others in Libya, in Benghazi, if you believe it was because of a film, you are greatly mistaken. And you, like those talking heads, have been influenced by information that cannot be backed up, just assumptions. What I'm going to give to you is backed up. What I'll place in your lap, quickly as I can, in a very condensed version, why 9/11/2001 happened, and why on this date, in 2012, we see another terrorist attacking a representative of this nation, United States of America, a representative of the West, which I think is nothing more than part of the third jihad in the Islam world. Now, I'll get to this later. We'll look at this first. The first objective or goal or reason behind these 9/11 attacks is revenge. And not revenge because a stupid little film insulted Muhammad. Sorry, if you believe that, you don't have a clue about Islamic history. Second, change. I also wrote there transformation. This is a type of change that brings transformation so we can coexist with each other. That's the new thing in town. That's what you heard over and over this last week in United Nations Council meetings. Change and transformation so we can coexist with each other. Now this will look like the angel of light in appearances, but not for those who have eyes to see and ears to hear, who are able to understand the darkness and evil behind this movement, which encompass the 9/11. I believe it's their, their calling card. Let's just call it that, to achieve these 2 things. Other things also, but these are the 2 most important. We'll first look at what kind of change they're trying to get the world to accept, and then we'll look at the revenge part of it. You got it? You come back to me. I'm just going to read to you some news articles first, and then I'm going to get into some history when I get to that revenge part. But they kind of change the transformation they want to see take place. They realize, don't think for one moment, the members of the Islamic beast haven't come to the realization that they can't overtake us with might, with military power. They can't. They cannot take over the West using that particular method. So they have to use something else. They're going to try to infiltrate all governmental systems of the West to bring about those changes. And not just educational programs, governmental positions, as high as they can go, the military. I'm not just talking about the United States. I'm talking about all the Western nations. Anywhere they can infiltrate, they will make their move. And they also realize that if they can get people to shut up about what Islam is all about, they will be more successful than any time in the past in getting into key positions, like I said, in governments, educational systems, anything related to the military, corporate 500 companies, you name it. Anything that carries some clout, that could bring on some changes that are necessary. So they have come to the realization that they have to get people to stop talking about Islam, especially about Islam in a negative way. They have to get people to stop talking about their prophet, Muhammad, not because they're insulted by it, because if the truth came out of what he really was, he was a murderer, a child molester, a thief, a hypocrite, a liar, delusional person that stepped into history, an agent of Satan to bring upon the seventh, and eighth beast. Now, what are some of the things that are happening? What are some of the things that are being pushed upon us? Pushed upon our leadership in this country to make these changes. I'm just going to read you a few things, because they know this is part of that transformation. They have to get people to the point where it stops putting so much attention on Islam. And they'll use that coexist idea. Leaders of the Kansas City Muslim group petitioned Obama to limit free speech of American citizens. Think about that. The leadership of the Islamic Society of Greater Kansas City have launched an online petition campaign for President Obama to back a bill to limit the free speech of American citizens they deem offensive. The petition states, the undersigned board of directors and members of the Islamic Society of Greater Kansas City urges you to sponsor a bill that outlaws any action that may insult one religion. Of course, they'll include all the religions in this. We utterly disagree with the violence that has taken place and the death of the United States Ambassador J. Christopher Stevens and other members of the United States Embassy staff in Libya. We support the apprehension and conviction of those responsible for such acts. We understand the First Amendment to the United States Constitution is part of the Bill of Rights and, as such, prohibits the making of any law respecting the establishment of religion, impeding the free exercise of religion, abridging the freedom of speech, infringing on the freedom of the press, etc. But when the allowance of free speech incites violence, it should be banned. The free speech didn't incite violence. The reaction to what you heard, because your prophet was not big enough, your Allah was not big enough to handle it, is what caused the violence. I guess you serve a sensitive God. Well, so do I. He didn't like anyone anyone not aligned with his ways. Imagine if he was so sensitive, though, he would have said, the heck with the rest of the world, and he didn't send his only begotten Son. We'd all be doomed. We'll be all such a wretched, miserable people living such a short amount of years compared to the span of eternity, that it would be a saddened state of mind to live every precious second of your human existence. Think about it. But he was not that sensitive. He's sensitive that you don't, as a responding father, choose to be his follower as a disciple of him and his Son. But yet, in the other sense, he's big enough that he keeps his word. He stood in a place where he had to give up his only begotten Son to stand in our place to receive the wrath that was destined for us, but no longer if we faith in his Son. So in a sense, he's sensitive, but he's not. Thank God. Thank God. Well, like I said, we'd be all such a miserable bunch of people running loose when we finally come to realization of the truth that this is only it, because there is no rescue plan. I tell you, God knows what this world will be like, because this is just it. Who knows if most people, even though they're not followers of Jesus Christ, only expected that this is just it. But that's getting off to a different conversation completely, so I want to stay on this. The film behind the violence that is occurring is part of the Muslim world. The film behind the violence that is occurring in part of the Muslim world. The innocence of Muslims, although it may be amateurish, its contents are very disturbing, insult to religion, and has ignited an already volatile part of the world. The film is repulsive to the sensibilities of Muslims and offends the religion of Islam in multiple ways. By denigrating the seriousness of Islam, our Prophet, and the Muslims in general, we believe that it would be in everyone's interest to ban such actions from reoccurring. So to ban free speech. Actions as such should not be tolerated, as they are very offensive. The violence that has taken place as a result of this film is very alarming. As Muslims, violence of any sort is prohibited in our religion. And that's where most will stop and agree with that and say they have a good point, not realizing they're lying between their teeth. With every breath they're taking, presenting this set of lies. I wanted to say something else, but I can't. As Muslims, violence of any sort is prohibited in our religion. Oh, really? There's 109 verses in the Quran that promotes violence. So where are you getting this Kansas City Muslim group information from? How come I know the Quran better than you? If you are in good conscience telling me the truth, or communicating to President Obama the truth, you're lying. And you're hoping, and there's not that much hope needed, because the world, American citizens don't know anything about the Quran, if you really think about it. They don't even know anything about the Bible. They just claim they do, and they become instant experts. But they don't know anything about the Bible. You think they're going to know that much more about the Quran? Like I said, the Quran contains at least 109 verses that call Muslims to war with non-believers for the sake of Islamic rule. Some are quite graphic, with commands to chop off heads and fingers and kill infidels whenever they may be hiding. Muslims who do not join the fight are called hypocrites. Now I'm reading something else besides what they wrote. And warned that Allah will send them to hell if they do not join the slaughter. Think about that. Here in the Quran, chapter 2, verse 181 and 193. And slay them. This is not violence? Let me read to you what they just wrote to President Obama. Actions as such should not be tolerated, as they are very offensive. The violence that has taken place as a result of this film is very alarming. As Muslims, violence of any sort is prohibited in our religion. Really? Well, let me introduce you to your Quran, chapter 2, verse 191 and 193, or through 193. And slay them whenever ye find them. Slay. You think that means slay in the spirit? No. And slay them whenever we find them, and drive them out of the places whence they drove you out. For persecution of who? Of Muslims is worse than slaughter of non-believers. And fight them until persecution is no more, and religion is for Allah. A religion, that's just one example. I don't have time to go through all 109 examples. Quran, chapter 5, verse 33. The punishment of those who wage war against Allah and His Messenger and strive to make mischief in the land is only this. This is the punishment, that they should be murdered or crucified or their hands and their feet should be cut off on opposite sides, or they should be in prison. This shall be as a disgrace for them in this world, and in the hereafter they shall have a grievous chastisement. The Quran, chapter 8, verse 12. I will cast terror in the hearts of those who disbelieve. Therefore, strike off their heads and strike off every fingertip of them. This is a lie, and they know it's a lie. And they want people like me to lose my First Amendment right to proclaim that they are lying. And you know what? They'll come as, like I said earlier, as an angel of light in appearances, because they will say, well, this has to mean that no one, Muslims also, can criticize Christians or can criticize Jews or can criticize whatever unbeliever if unbelievers and Christians and Jews don't criticize them. That's the lie. And in fact, if you think about it, I wish I had more time, but I don't, to go through more of these Quran verses, but I don't. If you really think about it, lying is acceptable, even in the Quran. Muslim scholars teach Muslims should generally be truthful to each other if you're Muslims, unless the purpose of lying is to smooth over differences. And there's two forms of lying to Muslims, to non-believers, anyone that's not a Muslim. And they are permitted under certain circumstances. I have a hard time pronouncing this. Taqiyya and kitman is what it's called. These circumstances are typically those that advance the cause of Islam. So it's okay to lie, which I just showed you in this letter for President Obama to create a bill to be introduced so free speech will not be able to incite violence in their eyes against Islam. Of course, they'll say for anyone, but not everyone's going around killing everyone in other religions. It's only Muslims. Oh yeah, you get a few Buddhists in India, but usually it's reacting to the murder and slaughter that's going on there now. In fact, I just had another article. This one came off, out of all places, MSN. Just today, Muslim protesters torched Buddhist temples' homes in Bangladesh. Hundreds of Muslims in Bangladesh burned at least 4 Buddhist temples and 15 homes of Buddhists on Sunday after complaining that Buddhist man had insulted Islam. They're going to push. They're going to push. They're going to keep creating this violence. They're going to create this image where the reason why they're reacting this way because they're tired of being insulted. They're tired of seeing their prophet insulted. They're tired of seeing their religion insulted. And unless we do something about it, you're going to see more of the same. It's only going to get worse. They're trying to instill fear. Muslims took to the streets in the area late on Saturday to protest against what they said was a photograph posted on Facebook that insulted Islam. The protesters said the picture had been posted by a Buddhist, and they marched to Buddhist villages and set fire to temples and houses. It's just not to Christians or Jews. It's to anyone. That insults Islam or Muhammad will receive the wrath of Muslims. Lying's permissible if it advances the cause of Islam. In some cases, by gaining the trust of non-believers in order to draw out their vulnerability and defeat them. In the Quran, once again, chapter 16, 106, establish that there are circumstances that compel a Muslim to tell a lie. So create a circumstance, and I just read to you a circumstance, folks. The leaders of Kansas City Muslim group petitioned Obama to limit free speech of American citizens. They're creating it, that saying that free speech is inciting violence and should be banned. that Muslims, in general, violence is not supported and it's prohibited in our religion. That is a lie. And it's a lie they can get away with it and have no ill conscience about it because they can't establish the circumstances according to the Quran 16:106 that compels a Muslim to tell a lie. In other words, they have a reason for the cause of Islam to be advanced. To write things like this to our President of the United States of America and say, you know what? We're a religion of peace. No, you're not. You never have been. It goes on to say, those people who are carrying out these acts cannot possibly call themselves devout Muslims as they are acting out of pure rage and not out of religious duties. Oh, really? So you're saying what's in the Quran is not part of your religious duty? Really? Because in the Quran, chapter 3, verse 54, it also states, and they being the disbelievers, schemed, and Allah schemed back against the disbelievers, and Allah is the best of schemers. Wow, what a message. You really think about it. Imagine teaching your kids that. The Arabic word used here for scheme or plot is makara, which literally means deceit. If Allah is deceitful towards unbelievers, then there is little basis for denying that Muslims are allowed to do the same. You see that in the 8th chapter and the 10th chapter, verse 30 and 21. Taken collectively, these verses are interpreted to mean that there are circumstances when a Muslim can be compelled to deceive others for the greater purpose. The greater purpose of what? Islam. You get it, folks? This is garbage. This is garbage. It sounds good on the surface, but it's lies. It's deceit. It's their plan for transformation. We condemn the violence and feel that in spite of the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, action may be necessary to pass such a bill or at least censor such actions in order to calm the current situation as well as prevent future reoccurrences. In other words, strip us our right to express freely because it might hurt their feelings. What is Islam producing? Wusses? You have no problem of committing murder, but yet you're sensitive against anything else about your prophet or your religion. It doesn't make sense to me. Everyone respects freedom of speech. No, you don't. Lie again. And the First Amendment in general. However, when freedom of speech results in defaming and insulting others and provokes the killing of innocent people, it should be outlawed. Outlawed. In light of the recent situation, the Islamic Society of Greater Kansas City hopes you may take up this cause and urge other representatives to do the same. We appreciate your time and efforts, and of course all the board of directors, which I can't even pronounce most of their names, blah, blah, blah. And this Islamic Greater Kansas City organization sponsoring an online petition to establish a law against insulting one's religion. Well, transformation, change, coexisting. They just don't stop at writing letters to our president or going on the news media and telling more lies and justifying their lies for this transformation. They also went to the UN this week. Muslim leaders called for clampdown on Islamophobia at UN. Muslim leaders demanded international action to stop religious insults and a challenge to U.S. President Barack Obama's defense of freedom of expression at the UN General Assembly. President Babang Yudhoyono of Indonesia, the world's most populous Muslim nation, said the film was another ugly face of religious defamation. He quoted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as saying that everyone must observe morality and public order, and commented, Quote, freedom of expression is therefore not absolute. Maybe not in your country, folks. I mean, Yuda, Huna, whatever your name is. But in this country, it still is. He called for an international instrument to effectively prevent incitement to hostility or violence based on religions or belief. In fact, there's international lawsuits right now trying to extradite citizens from different countries that insulted Islam in their country when they were there, but no longer there any longer. But they're not really citizens of that country. They just, while they were there visiting, I guess, somehow insulted Muhammad or Islam in one way or another, and now they're back in their homeland. They're trying to get them extradited so they could go on trial where that insulted was supposedly happened. They're pushing, folks. They're pushing for transformation. King Abdullah II of Jordan, a close U.S. ally, spoke out against the film and the violence it sparked. Pakistan's president condemned what he called the incitement of hate against Muslims and demanded United Nations action. Quote, although we can never condone violence, the international community must not become silent observers and should criminalize such acts that destroy the peace of the world and endanger world security by misusing freedom of expression, he told the assembly. Afghan's president, where we dumped millions in our own blood, took aim both at the anti-Islam video and publication of cartoons depicting the Prophet Muhammad, the latter occurring most recently in France. Karzai said, quote, such act can never be justified as freedom of speech or expression. The menace of Islamophobia is a worrying phenomenon that threatens peace and coexistence. He added in his address to the General Assembly, end of quote. Obama said he could not ban the video reportedly made by Egyptian cops because the U.S. Constitution protects the right to free speech. That's the best thing he said in that speech, by the way. But they're pushing. Wherever they can, they're going to push for an agenda. An agenda is to outlaw, criminalize any insults on religion in general, but it's aimed at insults against Islam, folks. Because their whole objective is to stop the conversation, to show what Islam truly is all about and what it represents. That's what they're trying to do. This has nothing to do with the revenge, and this has nothing to do with the 9/11 yet, even though it's related. I'll get to that if time. World leaders rally for blasphemy laws. In response to the innocence of Muslims global controversy, Turkish Prime Minister called for recognizing, quote, Islamophobia as a crime against humanity and international legal regulations against attacks on what people deem sacred. The Human Rights Commission of Saudi Arabian headquartered OIC, meanwhile, called for halting of, quote, growing intolerance towards Muslims, end of quote, and for, quote, international code of conduct for media and social media disallowed the dissemination of incitement material, end of quote. That same day, Secretary General Ban Ki-moon decried at a news conference the making of innocence of Muslims as a disgraceful and shameful act that represented the abuse of freedom and expression, a fundamental right and privilege. Using freedom of expression to provoke or humiliate some other values and beliefs was not worthy of protection. Then what is? Then what is? Now, I told you when I first started tonight, I lost my paperwork. I told you there's two reasons, two main reasons. There's more than two, but there's two main reasons why you're seeing what we're seeing at the UN, groups popping up everywhere, demanding a change, demanding a transformation, so we can coexist with each other without insulting or hurting each other's feelings, especially when it comes to religion. Listen, my Christ said to expect the persecutions. He didn't say to go out and slaughter them. He didn't go out and say to slay them. He didn't go out and say commit murder. I know, especially 1,000 to 1,500 years ago, Christianity took a wrong turn. In fact, I don't even call it Christianity. It was just that by name. And committed some atrocities that flat out are not Christian, folks. But we're calling for it for what it is. I don't see Islam anywhere saying anything about what Muhammad and the leaders of the Islam religion after Muhammad and the atrocities they created across northern Africa, east, west, the Ottoman Empire. I don't see any of them condemning any of their actions. They just won't. They just won't. The two reasons. One, change and transformation. That's all I'm going to say about that for now. Well, no, I'm going to say one more thing. Because yesterday, Muslim leaders call for global ban on anti-Islam hate speech is not an attack on the free speech. They continue this all the way to the last day of the session. Algeria demanded new efforts Saturday to limit freedom of expression to prevent denigrating attacks on Islam, appealing to the United Nations to take a lead as nations engage in new debate on the tensions between free speech and religious tolerance. In the address to the General Assembly, Algeria's foreign minister called for global action under the auspices of the United Nations to respond to violent demonstrations provoked by the UN-produced video that mocks Muslims and the Prophet Muhammad. While he didn't offer precise details of how he believed the UN could intervene, his call follows similar demands of the General Assembly from scores of leaders in the Muslim world who wanted new laws to ban insults against Islam. I'll just finish up with that on the change and transformation. This is what's going to be pounded over and over. And you're going to see, especially in the liberal left, people picking up on this and saying, you know what, that sounds like a good idea. It comes, like I said, in the appearance of an angel of light, so we could coexist. But those who have eyes to see and ears to hear know the darkness and evil that's behind it. It's trying to shut us up, using the political systems that we have to achieve that goal. Will they be successful? We'll see. Now I want to go, and I don't know if I can get this all done tonight. What about the first thing on that board? Go back to it. Revenge. See, 9/11 is about revenge, and not the recent 9/11, the September 11th, 2012 events was not because of a film. No. It was not because maybe there was CIA operatives trying to get a control of over the guns commitments that we made to Libya, as some have suggested, or whatever the reasons, and there's multiple. It's none of those things. It's none of those things. It's not about the White House covering. What White House administration hasn't covered for their mistakes? Was it a mistake not to keep these embassies or other associated dwellings that house our ambassadors and so forth? With the protection that's necessary to keep these lunatics from doing what they did? Absolutely. But all the Obama bashers, and I'm not an Obama fan, I made that quite clear. I'm not that much of a Romney fan either. All you're going to get is more Obama, but Obama light. Now that should tell you where I stand. But they're trying to make that on the right. Seem like there's some cover-up going on because the White House didn't come out and tell us what they knew, because they knew something went wrong, and it's not because of a film. That's for earheads that just wants to see a surface condition. That's not why the events that took place on 9/11 happened, folks. It's just the circumstances around that event was ideal for these terrorists to act upon, and they did. But they did it for a reason. 9/11 in history has a great significance to anyone that's part of Islam or Islamic beliefs. I don't care if you're moderate. I don't care if you're hardcore. You know, you're trained, you're taught the significance behind 9/11. We, not only in this country, but the rest of the world, are gooses of the new day. Don't have a clue. Don't have a clue why 9/11 2001 happened. They don't have a clue why 9/11 2012 happened. They don't have a clue. And once again, it's because we have neglected to look into history, which could also look into the future, which can prepare us, especially when a date like that comes around every year, to be watching and praying and be ready for the attacks of the enemy. Well, what do you mean? 9/11 is not new. It's hundreds of years old. Hundreds of years old. Remember, I taught on Charles Martel, the hammer, they called him, and how in 732 defeated the advancing Islamic army that came up from northern Africa as it marched west across the Iberian Peninsula into what then was Spain and what today is known as Portugal, and then was advancing up into France. And Charles the Hammer Martel met him up in the southern part of France and said, "No more." And he went at him. A miracle victory. If you go back to the teachings, that slain, I believe, the first jihad beast, the seventh beast, the first part of the seventh beast, to the point where it had to retreat. The advancement into France and eventually into the most further Western European nations that existed in that time, and then crossing the English Channel into England, was the goal, to control all the West. And if Charles Martel the Hammer was not successful, we'd probably be all Muslims today. But that was pushed back. But there's also a second jihad. I believe we're living in the third jihad, the last jihad. More about that in the future. But there's also a second jihad that put the finishing touches about 900 years later on the second jihad in the Ottoman Empire. At that time, the new version of the Islamic Front. Let me read you something about history. The Ottoman Empire had been expanding into Europe, and ever since Constantinople fell to the Turks, and even before that, wherever the Muslim armies went, they plundered cities, took slaves, turned churches into mosques, and converted many thousands of Christian captives to Islam at the point of a sword. The Sultan's army overran Greece, Bulgaria, Romania, and Serbia. They turned Protestant Hungary into a compliant vassal and made war repeatedly on Austria and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. The Ottomans had designs on Vienna, since the fall of the city would open the way into the heart of Austria and the rich principalities of southern Germany. They would go differently. They would come from the eastern northern route through Vienna up to Germany, and the goal was to go further west, finally all the way to England. That was going to be the second jihad, before the beast finally was slain in a two-part process. Having failed to take Vienna in the siege of 1529, the Turks prepared a second attempt in 1683. So about 154 years later, after 1529, under the leadership of the Grand Vizier Pasha Kara Mustafa, and with their Tartar and Malaysian allies, they made their preparations and fought their way towards the capital, overrunning Austrian villages and smaller cities in their path, and taking many captives. As the Muslim hordes approached Vienna, King Leopold fled with most of the citizens, leaving a garrison of about 11,000 soldiers and 5,000 citizen volunteers to hold the city against the Turks. The Viennese raised buildings in the area around the city walls in order to deny the enemy cover, and brought it livestock and dry food into the city to prepare for a siege. On July 16, 1683, the second siege of Vienna began. The tiny garrison in the city was no match for Mustafa's army of 140,000. Remember this, 140,000 against 16,000 that are holding up in the city. They were no match, but the Grand Vizier decided to starve the city into submission rather than attempt a frontal assault on its defenses. One of the main reasons the Turks had such success in the Balkans and Eastern Europe was that their Christian enemies were unable to unite against them. So the so-called Christians that they were not able to unite against the second jihad. Sounds familiar? I'm called a lunatic because the way I preach through the book of Revelation and Daniel and other books that comes against, that's called out the seventh and eighth beast, who it is and what their purpose is. Islam. Christians can't unite today, much less then. Nothing's new. History really does repeat itself. Since the Caliphate and the Ottoman Empire were one and the same thing, Islam experienced no such fractures, and it was a united horde that advanced through the mountain passes and across the plains toward Vienna. Austria and Poland had long been traditional enemies, only lately come into an alliance in the face of the common threat. Poland had traditionally been allied with France, but the French were devious even in alliance, especially under Louis XIV, the Sun King, S-U-N, by the way. The French is still being the French. History does repeat itself. Louis had designs in the German states along the Rhine and conducted his diplomacy with an eye towards the main chance in Luxembourg. All of these squabbling political identities were Catholic and theoretically united under the leadership of Rome, Pope Innocent XI. Pope Innocent XI. Now, Pope Innocent XI recognized the danger posed by the Ottomans and in the name of God and the Church called on all the rulers of Central Europe to unite against the common foe and save Vienna. Louis XIV, remember the French, declined to obey his pontiff and continued his scheming. Jan Sobieski, on the other hand, I want you to remember something about Jan Sobieski. Jan Sobieski had his brother he didn't have his brother. His brother, Jan Sobieski's brother, was beheaded by a Turkish army earlier. So Jan Sobieski, this Polish individual, who became really an outstanding military leader in such a short time, a young man too, not that old, had his own personal agenda of revenge, but it worked out for Christendom in a sense, because like I said, if it didn't, we might be all Muslim today. Jan Sobieski, on the other hand, was ready to answer the Pope's call. However, in order to go to war, Polish law required him to get unanimous approval of the Polish Diet. The French king's ambassador plied members of the Diet with massive bribes to induce them to vote against Sobieski's venture. So that, once again, the French are scheming. They're even bribing them. No, let's not send Jan Sobieski or anyone else to deal with the Turks. You got it? Through most of the summer, it seemed that Sobieski would be unable to ride to Vienna. Fortunately for the Austrians and for Christendom, Pope Innocent authorized the papal in Krakow to use the full resources of the Vatican. They were able to outbid Louis in Barbary, but only barely. In the end, the Diet authorized their king to ride to the relief of Vienna. So they authorized Jan Sobieski to ride to Vienna. When the King of Poland set off for Vienna in early September, the Viennese garrison was in desperate straits. Remember, they were held up. They were locked in a lockdown mode in that city, surrounded by the Turks. At least 140,000, some say more. And they're trying to starve them out. The people of the city were starving, and the city had suffered serious damage from the Turkish bombardment. The Ottoman army's artillery pieces were of inferior design and were unable to reduce the city walls, so the Turks had taken to tunneling. They had ample gunpowder, and their engineers dug mines under the walls and set off a number of charges that did serious damage and opened gaps in the walls. The Viennese rallied to build barriers in the gaps and managed to keep the Turks out. But it was only a matter of time until Mustafa succeeded. The Viennese garrison prepared for a last-ditch defense within the city walls. Time was running out, in other words, folks. It was then, at the last possible moment on the evening of September 11th, on 9/11, guess who shows up? Arrived on a hill north of the city. Jan Sobieski. Now, some call him Jan III Sobieski. But this Polish king shows up on 9/11. Now, the battle took place on 9/12. But in the minds of the Turks, the Ottoman Empire, the second jihadists, 9/11 has never been forgotten for two reasons. I don't know if I have a chance to read about the second jihad, two reasons tonight, but I will continue next time. I'll try. At the very last possible moment on the evening of September 11th, 9/11, Jan Sobieski arrives at a hill north of the city, leading a force of 40,000 Poles. And they're still outnumbered, if you think about it, 3-1. What's in the city and what's outside the city. Leading a force of 40,000 Poles and their German and Austrian allies. The battle began soon afterwards in the early morning hours. The Austrian and Germans attacked the Turks first at the center on the left rank. And of course, there's these idiots that say that this 9/11 date does really have no significance. It's not the reason behind anything. Oh, really? Oh, really? I'll continue to keep proving to you that's a falsehood. Yes, I understand the battle was finally won in 9/12, but they arrived on the scene on 9/11, the beginning of the end of the Ottoman Empire. And for the next few hundred years, they did not advance. They kept retreating and retreating to the point where they just went along with the peace treaty. It put an end. This was the beginning of the end. It was the final blow, beginning of the final blow of the second jihad that would put the seventh beast in check, slain. Now, it would come back to life again. We've seen that in Revelation 13. But it would come back to life again, not looking like the seventh beast, but having the same characteristics of the seventh beast, but now the eighth beast. I'll have to say more about that in the future. The Austrians and Germans attacked the Turks first at the center and on the left flank. The Turks counterattacked but held back a significant portion of their force in anticipation of entering the city through a breach in the wall. That very morning, the Grand Vizier had prepared a second and more powerful charge to be set off under the Lobel Bastion, one that would throw the city open to Turkish forces once and for all. Unfortunately, Mustafa, the Austrians within the city had mounted a counter-tunneling operation. The Austrians' moles detected the Turkish mine, found the charge, and defused it. At about the same time, the King of Poland, in the van with the fearsome winged hussars, and with 20,000 men behind them, led a cavalry charge down the hill into the right flank of the Ottoman Empire. The hussars were one of the most formidable fighting forces of the time, and the sound of the wind through the feathers of their artificial wings was said to unnerve the enemy's horses and drive superstitious soldiers into panic. And it was almost like the Gideon trumpets and the lamps being broken all over again. The battle was over in 3 hours. The king drove through the Turkish lines, and seeing his success, the Vienna garrison sallied forth from the city and hit the Turks from the rear. Demoralized by these attacks and their failures to breach the wall, the Turks fled eastward in haste, abandoning their tents, weapons, battle standards, provisions, and slaves. The siege was broken, the city was saved. Jan III Sobieski was received as the hero of Vienna. Though it was not evident at the time, the Ottoman tide had turned in the gates of Vienna and was about to recede, beginning its long withdrawal through the Balkans and Greece into Asia Minor over the next 2 centuries. And what became of the principals? Mustafa was executed in Belgrade later that year, paying the ultimate price for his monumental failure. They beheaded him, by the way, the Muslims. Jan Sobieski returned to Poland a hero. Austria gradually regained his lost territories and some. And King Louis continued his campaign against the German states. In the absence of their defenders, Luxembourg and other small German states were unable to resist and were annexed by the French. Over the long term, good relations between Poland and its neighbors to the west did not last. And with the ebbing of the Turkish threat, the old enemies returned. And of course, that did not fare well for King Sobieski. What is striking about Jan Sobieski is the quality of his leadership. More important than arms, manpower, tactics, supplies, and even courage, leadership must make the difference in any war. When Jan Sobieski led his men down the hill into Ottoman flank, it was his presence at the front of the charge that demonstrated his dauntless nature and absolute determination. Character cannot be faked, and men who recognize this kind of character in a leader will follow him to the gates of hell. In other words, he didn't retreat when things didn't look promising. He didn't retreat when he saw himself outnumbered. He didn't retreat to a different country, move further north, move further east, move further west, because the Ottoman Turks were advancing. He stood his ground and said, instead of retreating, we're going to advance forward, and we're going to defeat the enemy. We know how this all turns out in Scripture. We're not retreating, folks. We're advancing. It's too bad the rest of the Christian world, for the most part, and everyone else, don't get the message. I know the outcome. Yes, it might cost some lives. Yes, it might cost some hardships. Yes, it might cause you to stand your ground and say, no, I shall not be moved. I have God's word to back me up. I'm not going to look for a cozier couch somewhere else. I'm going to stay put and say, charge. Some of you need to start to have that mindset, or remind yourself again, that's the mindset you need when dealing with any kind of enemy, spiritually or unspiritual. And of course, it didn't hurt that he had one heck of an army behind him, especially the hussars. And there's only about, I think, 4,000 of those. Now, I'm going to read you something. It's very colorful about the winged hussars. And as I'm reading this, I want you to put the pictures up slowly. I'll tell you when. I chose this particular author because he brings some color into these winged hussars. This scared the bejesus out of the Turks. These scared the bejesus out of the Muslim Turks, the Ottoman Empire, when they saw them coming. Remember, even with Sobieski's army and the ones that were seized up in the city, behind the walls and gates, only added up to about 56,000 people, versus minimum 150,000 of the Turks of the Ottoman Empire. Some believe 250,000. So minimum 3 to 1. They were outnumbered. It didn't matter. Charge! Let me read you. It's very colorful, and I'm going to have to put in bleeps. But I chose this so it dings in your memory banks. The kind of, if we could find this in the secular world, how come we cannot find this in the Christian world? The Christian world always finds themselves running instead of standing their ground and saying, no. We'll keep proclaiming the truth. and we will not retreat. No, you can't take our First Amendment, our right of expression or freedom of speech away, whatever you want to call it. We'll fight to the very last day we have it. The Hussars, as we know them, first showed up on the scene in the early 16th century as part of the hammer-smashing army of stone-cold bleepity-bleeps. They came actually earlier on the scene than that, but that's okay. Under Hungarian King Stefan Báthory. Báthory, who fought the Turks alongside Vladi the Impaler, of course everybody's heard of that character, and was an answer of the infamous Virgin Blood Countess and psychopath Elizabeth Báthory. Basically levied the cavalry force by conscripting out of every 20 Polish and Lithuanian peasants to strap on a pair of wings and a suit of heavy armor and start piercing the faces of anyone stupid enough to step into Eastern Europe. Over the next 200 years, these ordinary men morphed into a 10-ton anvil of pointy justice that would go up against some of the toughest armies the world had to offer and completely bleep them inside and out. The combat record of the Winged Hussars, you can start putting it up now, stands for itself. In 1577, a massive charge of this ultra-heavy cavalry unit smashed the German army from Danzig, blistering into teeth of a 12,000-man force and crushing them until all that remained was a well-trampled patch of red where the enemy army once used to be. Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth losses in the battle totaled about 88 men, and most of those clowns weren't even hussars. In 1601, 1,000 hussars defeated a Swedish cavalry force 4 times their size. At the Battle of Kirchholm, 4 years later, the hussars, whose commander's completely bleepity-bleep motto was "kill first, calculate later," sent 1,000 lancers in charge against 11,000 Swedish infantrymen and cannons for some reason. Incredibly, despite the ridiculous idiocy of sending your elite troops on such an impossible mission, the frickin' hussars jammed their poles into anything they could find and not only emerged victorious, but utterly slaughtered their opponent's army, hacking the broken infantry units into giblets as they fled the field. Now, this is all their victories prior to what happened in 1683 at the gates of Vienna. Amazingly, that wasn't even the most impressive victory. This mobile last stand accomplished in its proud heritage as the Commonwealth's premier exporter of busted-up faces. At the Battle of Clushino in 1610, the Hussars were outnumbered 10-1 and still somehow came out on top, utterly annihilating an army of 40,000 Swedes and Russians with just 4,000 lancers. You can circulate through those pictures over and over again as I'm reading this. What might be even more awesome than the Winged Hussars' much-deserved reputation and seemingly invincible bleep wreckers is their completely over-the-top awesome battle gear. These guys went with don't go so fast. These guys went with the heaviest armor they could find, decking themselves out in fully articulated plate mail at a time when the most European armies were switching away from breastplates and over to firearms. But these ferocious warriors didn't even give a bleep about rushing a state-of-armed muskets with hand-to-hand combat weapons. Their primary implement of facial demolition was a lightweight yet still completely insane 19-foot lance capable of outreaching even the most well-endowed infantry spear hedges. And after they splintered that up, the bleepy-bleeps of their foes, the Hussars could fall back on pistols, a dagger, and one of 2 different types of swords. The Winged Hussars also went that extra mile to ensure that they were charging ahead in perfect formation. Their army was burnished and well polished so that it gleamed in the sunlight. Most Renaissance-era knights preferred black armor because it was more resistant to rust. They wore brightly colored armor, and oh yeah, they also had giant bleepity-bleep wings strapped onto their backs. These wings were made of ostrich or eagle feathers glued onto wooden frames that arched up over the back, made an insane whistling noise while the Hussars were charging, completely unsettling, terrifying, overawing the enemy into brief moments between when they said, "Holy bleep," and when they had a kebab skewer jammed into their eye sockets at about 120 miles per hour. Some of the Hussars also used the wow factor by stuffing severed heads down the tips of their weapons and charging the battle with a lance full of heads. Now, I'm not condoning this type of warfare. I'm just saying this is what the Turks saw. They thought they had Vienna, their final launching point before they head north and west to conquer of the then known world, which then would, in their mindset, be the stepping stone to convert the whole world to Islam, which has been their goal from the very beginning. The Hussars were also super well trained, capable of changing direction, altering formation in mid-charge, and then plowing through their enemies, circling around and hitting them again from the rear. In case you've never seen footage of a well-executed cavalry charge before, this is kind of like the equivalent of the Blue Angels doing all their trademark death-defying stunts while in the middle of a dogfight. I don't care who you are, this has to kind of bleepity-bleep with your head a little. While they have a long string of victories under their heavyweight championship belts, the Winged Hussars' finest hour came during the epic Battle of Vienna in 1683, when the Ottoman Turkish armies were busting bleeps across Eastern Europe looking to conquer all Christendom, with the main body of the Holy Roman Imperial Army completely surrounded and besieged by over 200,000 Turkish warriors, according to this author. The bleepity-bleep Polish King Jan Sobieski led the single hugest and most bleepity-bleep cavalry charge in history. Their wings fluttering and zipping like creepy, spear-flinging birds of prey, 3,000 winged hussars plowed into the Turkish force, driving them back, plunging their supply train, and driving the Turks from the field. It would be the furthest west the Ottoman Empire would ever advance. It's the furthest west the second jihad ever would advance. Therefore, failure once again. And when did they show up to war? When did they show up in the battlefield? They could have waited before the Ottoman Empire reached their territory. No, their country. They showed up in advance. And when? When did they show up? Do you remember? September 11th, 1683. Muslims have never forgotten that, folks. There's another important date I need to bring to you that also has a 9/11. And I'm not talking about 2001. Hopefully I get to that tonight. I don't mention that the Battle of Vienna has to go to the Ottoman Grand Mustafa. I don't think it's that honorable at all. Who personally charged out to try to help his men, fought in hand-to-hand combat even after his entire bodyguard was annihilated, and only escaped after saving the holy banner that once belonged to the Prophet Muhammad from falling into Christian hands. Mustafa was rewarded for his heroism by having his head chopped off and delivered to the Sultan in the velvet bag. But what can you do? There's no just pleasing Sultan sometimes, especially when you just led 3,000 Polish hussars completely rout a force roughly 100 times larger than them. They just didn't realize that this is how the winged hussars rolled. These guys were nuts. They never backed down from a fight, always went completely bleepity-bleep, all out, all the time, and looked at 10-1 as an exciting challenge rather than a suicide charge. Total insanity. In the evening on September 11th, 1863, and then in the morning in 1683, September 12th, the second wave of the Great Jihad had met its match, folks. Now the third wave, I believe, of the second jihad started in 2001, 9/11. But that's for another time. Historians remember Sobieski for his historical victory, but he didn't just break the siege of Vienna. God used him for a greater purpose, to protect Christendom and thus continue the spread of the gospel throughout the earth. Do you believe that? Absolutely. Absolutely. That's why in the unseen evil world, this date has great significance, 9/11. It's not by accident, it's not by coincidence. From Sobieski onward, the Ottoman Turks, the second jihad, the last remnant of the seventh beast, regressed to become what what's been called the sick man of Europe. Well, accurately, it's the very, very sick man of Europe. Why? Because it couldn't be healed from this victory that start pushing back the second jihad and one other victory. That one other victory, if I have time to go through it real quick, which I don't, is another battle. Is another battle. You know, I'll get to that next time. You cannot listen to the media and pick up this kind of information. Not even the best of them. You don't find it behind the pulpits. And obviously, our government or anybody else's government knows the significance of these dates on 9/11. There's another battle on 9/11 that the Muslims never forgot. And it's an important battle. And because of these two battles, with Sabatsky showing up at 9/11 and gaining the victory in 9/12, and the other battle, which I'll get to next time on 9/11, they have never forgotten their defeats. And they are seeking revenge. And to them, this date is very important. They'll do everything they can to bring terror in this third jihad to the world. It's in the same mentality that's used when once they claim an area for Islam, even if they lose it, in their mindset, it's always Islamic. And their whole mindset then is to achieve the goal of reclaiming it. That's on particular sites or lands. Well, also, they use dates as their signposts to remember their defeats, but also to once again to reclaim victory. It's about revenge. I mean, President Theodore Roosevelt, he has many things I don't like about his presidency, but there's one thing he sure got right. He wrote in a 1916 book, quote, from the hammer of Charles Martel, remember in 732 in the Battle of Tours, the first jihad? From the hammer of Charles Martel to the sword of Jan Sobieski, Christianity owed its safety in Europe to the fact it could and would fight as well as the Mohammedan aggressor. Further comments, Theodore Roosevelt understood exactly who the enemy was. Today's politicians fudge the issue, talking only about terrorists. They are just not terrorists, they are Islamic terrorists. And the sooner we understand that the entire Western world is under Islamic assault on a variety of other fronts, the better we are able to face the threat. That if Israel hasn't acted first, as they are the West's first line of defense, this is a good reason to give them every support and stop pretending that there is such a thing as moderate Islam. Now, that was what Alan Franklin wrote. But Theodore Roosevelt gave credit to Charles Martel and Jan Sobieski. He had the same view, we all be Muslims today. It's not like politicians in the past didn't recognize Islam for what it is. This date, folks, through the eyes of Islam, which unfortunately you're not being told the information, to bring yourself to the point where you can understand this insanity. To Islam, it's not insanity, it's reclaiming victory. To revenge defeat. We need Christians today that don't retreat. To be the Christian hussars of God's Word. To bring a truth to a world that's so empty of the truth whether it's God's word or anything else just about. That's why we exist in this ministry, to proclaim that Jesus saves, to proclaim the gospel. Well, guess what? If you make the statement, and if you believe the gospel is Jesus' own words and what he did for us, because you see a lot of it, if you have one of those Bibles, that Jesus words in red, well, there's a lot of Jesus words also in the book of Revelation. That's also part of the gospel. The good news of his return and who has the last word. Christ already won this victory. He's just asking us to be Christian hussars in getting the word out there. We come with the sword of the Spirit. God's word. They want to shut us up. And the only way they can is through transformation, as I pointed out earlier. And they're trying hard to get that done. But they also want revenge. Revenge against the West because of the defeats they suffered. Not only during the first jihad, but also the second jihad that started the final elimination of the seventh beast through the first jihad and then completing in the second jihad. They want revenge. These dates, and if you don't think the final eighth beast incorporates what was then the Ottoman Empire as the driving force, plus other Islamic nations now, you're crazier than a loon. I don't even know why you listen to me. Go back to the Christian Science fiction theories. Now, the 21st hijacker that was captured in the Twin Cities during the WTC attacks, remember that? Was asked why they chose to attack upon us on September 11th. You know what his response was? He admonished the FBI agents involved and quoted Muslim historians and the utter humiliation of Islam took place on 9/11. And he gives another date, which I'll cover next time. They know. How come we're not being told what their agenda is? Nothing has changed in their way of thinking. We need to start getting to the mindset, because part of watching and praying is seeing what's coming up ahead. And God's given us his word. I've proven that through timelines. And plus, there's many other things I haven't covered yet that gives us the clues to watch for, so we can pray that when it comes, we'll be ready. Not just for his return, but everything that happens prior to that. Christians need to wake up, folks. This is just a side note. You know, I talked about the British Mandate and how Britain was involved in it. And of course, depending on the date, 918 and 1923 and even 1920, you have all these different dates of when the administration of this British Mandate either took place or supposed to take place, when it came into fruition, and so forth. But there's one date in history that you cannot question. You think this is by accident? You think Islam has forgotten this? That no matter when the British Mandate took effect, new governors, and this is according to British reports, new governors took their office of oath, or their oaths of office, guess what? In Jerusalem during this British Mandate. September 11th, once again, 1922. Now we know that was part of one of two horns. See, the unseen world knows how to push the buttons using human instruments to keep hammering in the Lord's face about the significance of these dates. We need to start recognizing the importance of these dates. We need to start being ready. We need to stop being buffaloed or conned into believing it's something else. It's not because of 14-minute stupid film. No. It's about change, the way we think about Islam, and it's about revenge. Revenge for the defeats of the first and second jihad. And they are determined that the third jihad will succeed worldwide. We know what happens in the biblical concept of geographical territory, that we have information from Scripture. But it does affect the worldwide. You need to be ready. Now, I'm not done with this. I'm frustrated because I want to continue, and I have more to say. To give you insight, what's really going down, not all this yap in the media, or yappity yap from Christian science fiction theories. This is what 9/11 means to Islam. Revenge. And they're going to keep pushing it until they receive it in their eyes. I got news for you. You will not have the last word in Islam. Jesus Christ will. But I'll get to that. Do you get it, folks? Now, I threw a lot of history at you real quick, and I went faster than I wanted to, but I want to at least get this far in this segment tonight, and I'll continue this next time. If you get it, if you're starting to understand how significant 9/11 really is, and not all the other garbage you're hearing about it, then I want to hear from you. Let me know if you want me to continue. Play this song.